The reverence with which Akira Kurosawa's filmography is held is pretty warranted, I do feel. I've seen Kurosawa referred to as one of the greatest conjurers of human emotion in the history of the medium. That might be true, but I'm at an impasse because to so many, their love of Akira Kurosawa is tied to an adoration of Ikiru, terminally ill old man sitting on a swing in the snow, bonding with a child. I don't know, not a bad film by any means, not even close, but not one of my favourites. Pour some gasoline, I'll burn easier. Most everything else was amazing, though, obviously. In fact, I would suggest that later Kurosawa, the 1970s through to the 1990s, was his finest era. Much like his black and white classics of the 50s and 60s, Kurosawa's handling of colour in this era absolutely floors most other practitioners of the form, no doubt leaving them befuddled. How does he do it? How indeed. We will try to answer this question one picture at a time. For the reason that I feel like it today, we will start backwards. 1993's Matadaya would be Kurosawa's final feature film. Its plot synopsis entails the retirement life of Heiken Uchida. Uchida was based off of a real-life figure of the same name, who lived from 1889 to 1971. In Kurosawa's picture, he is portrayed, sensationally, by Tatsuo Matsumura and depicted as a beloved mentor to countless still dedicated former pupils. In his older years, the former alumni return in order to assist him and his beloved spouse, portrayed by Kyoko Kagawa, as they embark upon their twilight years. This is the human odyssey which was so promised by the initial hype I had heard of surrounding Kurosawa, and 1952's Ikiru in particular. In my opinion, Matadao is one of Kurosawa's masterpieces. It goes without saying that this film, written by Kurosawa and, this might seem surprising, Ishiro Honda, the Gojira Kaiju legend, yes. Honda had co-directed Dreams of Kurosawa owing to his knowledge and experience of film VFX, much required for that production, although I was unaware to the extent to which they had collaboration outside of the Dreams production. Very fascinating. All of the cast is, of course, brilliant, and they realise this delicate screenplay with insurmountable care. The key factor, though, is its visual transmission. Kurosawa directs his two credited cinematographers, Takao Saito and Masaharu Ueda, in capturing some of their most impressive work. Impressive because it is relatively modest in comparison to their previous productions. Saito had first worked with Kurosawa, and for any film a cinematographer it seems, on 1962's Sanjuro. He's also credited on High and Low and Redbeard in that decade. He would return to photograph 1970's Dodeska Den, and then, with Ueda in tow, on 1980's Kagemusha. Given that film's cinematographic genius, it was no wonder that Kurosawa stuck with these two brilliant minds for Ran, Dreams, Rhapsody in August, and Matadao. Actually, if we recall a previous FOTD, 1977's The Last Dinosaur, discussed very recently, that picture was shot by Ueda. Never would have guessed. Now, it seems obvious that Matadaya would be a more modest work of cinematography in comparison to the ethereal majesty of Kagemusha, the Shakespearean nightmare of Ran, Dreams being dreams, and Rhapsody in August being so overwhelmingly vivid and alive, set amongst manicured gardens and traditional architecture. Matadaya, by comparison, is mostly set in urban, upper-middle-class environments, typically indoors, and with a colour scheme dominated by browns, blacks, and whites. But this all serves to emphasize the life of a man who has nothing left to do except relish in the company of others. The adventure is over, no more unique sights and sounds, this is the world of retirement. Almost occurring in the same cultural time frame, in story, as Nerusei's final feature Two in the Shadow, these two films borrow that same photographic reliance upon the colour brown. Something about the garnished timber which dominates this film's structural designs evokes a classy traditionalism disconnected from the industrial steel/chrome metropolitan modernism of the major cities. It is this wherein a similar insight, similar to Nerusei's Two in the Shadows, into Japanese post-war identity is extrapolated. The attrition between classical Japanese aesthetics and the modern globalization of glass, metal, and combustion engines. Potentially as much a reaction to its own industrialization nightmare of the earlier decades in the century as to its dominion by the fossil-fueled West, certain Japanese filmmakers who evoke this era, or at least Naruse and Kurosawa, contemporaneous and retrospective respectively, prioritize a return to the forest. Symbolically represented for its protagonist's woes in Nerusei's film, and materially represented within Matadaya by its staging within wooden traditional homes, as befitting of its kind farewell to the complicated anguish of the working life's struggles. I don't see this as a conscious decision necessarily on the part of either filmmaker, although I do see their settings as telling in contrast to the vast number of films, including from both directors, which were determined to place themselves right in the middle of the modern, dropped into the heart of the big city, in order to inform its audiences on the relevance of the then contemporary. Two in the Shadow and Madadayo both feature characters retreating or retracting away from the hustle and bustle of modern society, and in Kurosawa's case, the character's journey reminds us in particular, potentially, of his own. The title of the film, Madadayo, appears to be Japanese, or rather it translates into English as Not Yet. There is an argument to be made that this was Kurosawa's most relentlessly, viscerally, inherently, and inescapably personal film. By default. To make one final note about this film's photography, I suspect that this film was heavily storyboarded, as it has been said was the case of certain of Kurosawa's later features, due to the choreography and precision of certain shots. They contain a superlative symmetry and a filmic residue which could possibly only exist so effortlessly in the mind of a master who had made so many legendary films, and he could picture them before they even began any principal photography. Madadayo is a moving film, which I will probably only find more so as I arrive closer to the age of its protagonist and of its extraordinary director. If any film can be lavished for its purely emotive excellence alone, let it be Madadayo.